them. And then it's a year later, I was smashing the hurdle heights by not like a couple of centimeters, like 10 centimeters,
Oh, wow.
12 centimeters. The interesting one for me was 4 max height hurdles. So that's obviously the highest force demands in that because I'm falling the highest each time and I have to preserve that the most. I beat that one by, I think, I want to say like 15 centimeters. So my ability to utilize that force upon landing to, rebound back out was so much higher.
That was Chris Scott, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Lost Empire Herbs, and I want to share with you how to get a free bag of pine pollen through Lost Empire here today. Quickly first, I used to think herbs was just ginkgo biloba you got at the drugstore, but after being introduced to compounds such as the Phoenix formula through Lost Empire, I've been a regular consumer of Lost Empire herbs for over 4 years now. The Phoenix formula instantly changed my viewpoint on herbalism. I was literally buzzing with energy after my first dose. Within 2 weeks, I was noticing strength improvements in the weight room, and it's been fun expanding my herbalism regime to different things throughout the Lost Empire Herbs store. In Phoenix formula in particular, along with shilajit, which is a very popular herb for strength and performance, you also have pine pollen, which is a superfood. It offers a variety of energy, health, and performance benefits. And you can grab that free bag of pine pollen with the modest cost of shipping by heading to justflypinepollen.com. If you want to check out other herbs that I enjoy through Lost Empire, you can head to lostempireherbs/justfly and grab 15% off your order. I can't recommend Lost Empire enough, and I really enjoy the fact that I've been able to partner with them through this podcast for as long as I have. So be sure to check that out. Let's get on to the rest of the show. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's awesome to have you here. Thanks for tuning in. And I'm excited to welcome to the show today strength and parkour coach Chris Scott. Chris has a degree in sports therapy. He works at Jump Gym in the United Kingdom, and he's an accomplished athlete in the parkour realm. He also has high acrobatics ability, high levels of bodyweight strength, and recently Chris made waves in social media doing training phases featuring very high depth drops. And parkour as a sport is one that highlights human adaptability, and it also kind of breaks the rules of more typical training in terms of athletes jumping off of very high things and landing repeatedly. The sport of parkour helps us to ask the question how we as humans can adapt to things that you wouldn't ordinarily see in typical training. And so on the show, we'll unpack a little bit about Chris's recent training experience using a series of higher drops, working up to 8 feet and doing drops and rebounds off of that, and how it impacted his reactivity, the rest of his training, as well as strength levels. Just a quick disclaimer as well, of course, the point of this show is not to march your athletes up to 8-foot boxes and start dropping off of them. Chris is a highly trained parkour and reactive athlete, the only other athlete I've seen doing anything in the realm of 8-foot box height, and dropping or depth jumping was an Olympic level high jumper. So obviously use common sense, use progression, understand what you're training for and what the needs of your athletes are. I'm sure you already knew all that, but with the topic of the show, it definitely has something I wanted to say. So this is just to give us more understanding about the limits of human ability in this realm and what type of adaptations can come from this type of work with a highly trained athlete who is physically ready for this type of work. So on the podcast today, Chris will be talking again about the results of that high drop training. We'll also go into single versus double leg drop iterations, single and double leg plyometric ideas. We'll be talking about plyometric variability, so parkour being a very variable and very plyometric in nature sport. So how can we apply those principles into more traditional plyometrics we'll be discussing. Finally, we'll be talking about impulse training, seasonal aspects of plyometric type work, and more. I really enjoyed talking to Chris, getting his frame of mind and his perspective on parkour and plyometric training. And I know you guys will enjoy this show. So let's get here to episode 374 with Chris Scott. Chris, great to have you on the show, man. Could you get started by just telling us a little bit of your athletic background? So what I know parkour, obviously, but what led you to where you are now from an athletic perspective?
Yeah, so my training background's purely, the origins is in parkour, seeing as a kid, wanting to do it. starting it, and then ultimately into the gym to try and increase performance. But then, yeah, long and short of it, it's like the parkours ended up influencing my gym training just as much as the other way around. And I look to get the best of both worlds really in my training. And that's kind of all stems from starting out in parkour, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. With parkour, I remember when I first saw it, to me, a lot of I just viewed it as people, just jumping around in, the streets or buildings or whatever. And I don't think I really tagged it to outputs until I started talking to Rafe Kelly. And one of the things he had talked about was parkour athletes who, the high level ones who are very good jumpers, who didn't have that hard of a time making a switch to, let's say, triple jump or long jump in track and field. And it's like, all right, well, now you're talking my language, and then going to return the source myself and going through basically triple jump in nature is the best way I can describe it. And just feeling just how powerful I felt and using my body in that way. And I think the common description is, it's chaos. You need to respond to chaos, which, okay, well, what does that mean? To me, it actually means giving your body just the amount of variability and problem solving that actually can raise up the level of training and make it even better. And I'm like, all right, now you're really talking my language because we're talking outputs here. And I know, with the parkour, I know you're really well known in the Instagram space for doing very high depth drops. And I think that's a good talking point for, well, how does this transfer? What are some transference pieces from parkour, jumps, drops into muscle outputs, being able to jump high or squat a lot of weight, or things that we would say, okay, we want to put a number on this. We want to put this in the way we can frame it. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit about maybe your more recent explorations in the world of drops, dropping off of very high objects and either sticking the landing or doing depth drops, and then what you learned from that and how you saw those outputs going over into other spaces in training.
Yeah, so the drops were a very new thing, and it was for a period of time. It was an experiment. In my mind, those drops aren't that high, because in parkour, like I've dropped from that height many times, but typically in parkour, we're looking to minimize the impact on our body. So I was looking for ways to stress my body in ways that I hadn't tapped into before. And I was like, oh yeah, I know I can drop off that height, but I've never tried to perform these drops in a traditional manner, or like an altitude drop manner where you're landing stiff, or a depth drop manner where we're rebounding out. Typically from that kind of height, I'm purposefully trying to minimize impact rather than take advantage of it. So I was doing a range of drops. I numerous ones that I got from your website, actually, on your plyometrics of the week or whatever that section is. Kind of, yeah, I was rotating through variations and kind of just exposing myself to these landings from varying heights, single leg, split landings, higher two-footed landings, and kind of, yeah, started going higher and higher. Not all of them were high. Like I'm terrible at the single leg ones, which was interesting. Really struggled with them. But yeah, I just kept stressing the body. I think I did it for twice a week for 6 weeks. Is how long I went for. Ultimately was dropping off 254 centimeters and rebounding out of it.
That's like a little over 8 feet for our American folk.
No, or 100. I think it's exactly 100 inches. And yeah, obviously it wasn't a super quick rebound. It's just a long way down. But interestingly, it felt better to rebound out of than to stick. Yeah, it almost felt less impact to do the depth jump versus just the altitude landing.
Interesting.
And yeah, that was a real interesting phenomenon. Like it's almost like I had to stick it, I had to brace for impact and kind of eat it. But when I would drop and try and rebound, far more casual, which was very, very interesting to me. But yeah, so I did that for a period of time. Yeah, people were saying it was stupid. All the Russians found you can't go over 1.5 meters, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I don't even perceive this as high because of my parkour background. It's not easy, and there is a limit, of course, but I've seen people do higher. I've jumped off higher and I know I can handle the forces. And I was very much going by feel and kind of, yeah, not to push it too far and I didn't get any negative output. Like there was no niggles that started to arise or anything. So I did that for that period of time. And then um, essentially every single jump variation that I do, whether that's within parkour or in the gym training for parkour, was increased. So I have like hurdle variations that I routinely do, but I hadn't been doing them since last summer. So like my power wasn't, or like I shifted my goals to try and hit a strength goal of 3 times bodyweight deadlift for a period of time, and I wasn't doing any jumping. So that was off the back of that. So I did have a good or newfound strength levels before running this experiment as well, which perhaps helped. But I revisited all my old hurdles. So it might be like a 4 hurdle, like crescendo, or it might be one low, one high, one low, one high, or it might be 4 max height hurdles. So yeah, all different combinations like that. And straight away, without doing them since last summer or last year, so those numbers, the records on the hurdles were like second or third time through setting records as well. So I wasn't holding back before. It was me aiming to beat them. And then just a year later, I was smashing the hurdle heights by not like a couple of centimeters, like 10 centimeters,
Oh, wow.
12 centimeters. The interesting one for me was 4 max height hurdles. So that's obviously the highest force demands in that because I'm falling the highest each time and I have to preserve that the most. I beat that one by, I think I want to say like 15 centimeters. So my ability to utilize that force upon landing to, yeah, rebound back out was so much higher. But then also static jumps. So in parkour, standing precision is like a horizontal broad jump between 2 walls. That I can't, I increased that by numerous inches. And that opens up a whole world of opportunities in parkour that weren't there before. Because I can jump to an 11 or 12 out of 10 jump, and we call it a bounce off. So we'll jump, and we know we can't make it, but we can bounce off safely and rebound to our feet. Yeah, and jumps that were 11 or 12 out of 10 before, I can now do. And there was no other jumping in that period of time. It was the drops, and I did the drops, and then just unlocked a bunch of new challenges, things that I couldn't do. And that's the thing with parkour, the walls don't move. I around my city, I know all different challenges, some easy, some hard, some that I've never done, some that I hope to be able to do. And I kind of know where they are and know the dimensions and kind of what's within my limit and what's not in my limit. So to do just drops, I'm not even jumping, and to open up a whole realm of options. In the city, I've been training for like 15 years. And it's not coincidence. It's not a good day or a bad day or something like that. I know the ins and outs, and it really opened up a hell of a lot of possibilities for me just from doing these altitude drops.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about, well, obviously you're a well-trained parkour athlete. So this is, obviously people listening, don't have your athletes just go right to 8-foot boxes. Not a good idea, but you have trained your way to do this. And, I was thinking about what you were saying with, well, a few things, but before I ask you some other questions, I did want to ask a little bit more about like volumes, like how often per week were you doing this kind of thing? What did the total volume tend to look like? And then how many were drops where you just stuck it or kind of stuck it? Versus, I guess stopping on a dime is probably not going to be able to really happen at 8 feet of a height. In the sense of like,
it did. So all of my variations, I wasn't doing the depth jump, but I was just doing the drop because, like I say, I've essentially avoided that my whole training career because of the influence of parkour. Saying we want to look after our body, we don't want to take unnecessary impact. Any drop that I would have taken before would have been focused on minimizing impact. So I was deliberately purely doing the drops. I wasn't doing the depth jump at all. And then I would say I can't remember exactly, but I kind of used I somewhat went by feel, but I had like a number of reps in my mind that would have been felt like overkill, and I was staying below that. But sometimes I did a little bit more, but it was generally a pretty level amount of volume. And so, yeah, two-footed one from lots of from a high height, and then the next week if I went single leg, there's some regulation in there simply by changing the movement. Then the week after, I might have been doing so. I was doing the band accelerated, so basically catapulting yourself out the floor from a box,
Yeah.
and yeah, like you'd know the name probably, where you're kind of knee up in a marching position, and you pick the other leg up and then snap down
Oh yeah.
from that position. Kind of, I really was just exposing myself to all these different positions and seeing how stiff I could land. Not all of them were high. Few were high. It's almost like I'd go 4 weeks and then throw in a high one. How did it feel? And then, when I say not all of them were high, not all of them were 254 centimeters. They were all, a lot of them were like shoulder, head height.
Got it.
Which is still pretty high for regular people, or what people's perceptions are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. The one where your leg starts up in the air, kind of like the Karate Kid, and then you bring the legs together.
Yeah.
That's altitude drop legs was the term Jay Schrader had given to that. And yeah, it's interesting with, you even mentioned the drops being a little bit harder at that high a height. I know for me, in the last few years, I started to really bring back the drops in more, not off 8 feet, more so off of, like for the average athlete, it would be somewhere between 45 centimeters and maybe 70 centimeters. So 18 to 30 inches, somewhere in there. And I started doing that a lot more after hearing how Jeremiah Flood had mentioned a warm-up that he used that I think he got from Jay Schrader, was basically do iso holds and then a bunch of those altitude drop legs. And that was the warm-up. That was the juice warm-up. And you could do that. And then, like, I remember the first time I did that warm-up in the gym, like every athlete basically either PR'd or came really close to their PR on the 20-meter dash. Or if they didn't PR, they were at least able to get very close to their best multiple times in a row without drop-off. And I was like, wow, there is something to this. And the thing that's cool about the drop, too, is that it's interesting because, like, parkour is such a skill and task-oriented thing, but a drop is, you're really minimizing a lot of, there's not a lot of skill per se to dropping off something. It's the skill is the muscle firing up and learning to deal with the muscle, tendon, bone, foot interaction on a smaller, minute level. And I used to think, someone had said, this was a long time ago, I think there was research on this. I'd be curious to go into that research study, but it was something like if you do too many drops, like if you're training athletes and they did no depth jumps where you drop down and jump back up from the box, or hurdle hops where you're hopping over. But if you do all drops, then your jump starts to get segmented. Like you would go to jump and you spend too long in the isometric phase, which on the surface makes sense. But then as I've gone through all this, I mean, in doing like a bunch of altitude drop legs, I'm not seeing it. But I think if you dropped and you did like a snap down where you like snap your arms back and stuck it every time, I could see that possibly doing it, because there you're kind of like the altitude drop leg. You're not really like swinging your arms back like a jump. It's almost like your job there is just to hit the ground with maximal tensioning, and that's it. And it's in like and there's very little give. Where I could see like dropping down, more give, like kind of letting your arms go back, freezing a position. I could see that possibly getting in the way. So I'm just curious if you have anything with that.
Yeah, it doesn't. I guess I feel like that would probably just depend on the skill of the jumper or the athlete in the first place, because I can't imagine really anything interfering with my jump technique at this point.
Yeah. That's true.
It may not make
in the
me
first place,
may not make me jump further, or it could. I might be fatigued and therefore jump less or something. But the technique itself is so ingrained. I can jump, pretty much maximally and land on a rail. I trust what my technique is. I like to a very high level. Like I can do jumps at height where the risk of falling if I were to overshoot or undershoot is highly consequential.
Yeah.
Like I'm not worried about anything that I do in the gym in any way really changing that technique, but I have the years of the training in that regard behind me. So potentially someone with less, maybe it is more influenced by things, but yeah, it's hard to imagine any one thing in the gym really messing up technique side of things.
Yeah. I know for me, I will say I'm someone who's a little more internally rotated through my femurs. And I've found that doing too many bilateral, like hurdle hops, high hurdle hops, even squatting, because I'm more internally rotated to start, and that's where a little bit of my bias is. Yeah. I've found that I do shift my power profile a little bit in favor of longer ground contacts when I do a lot of that stuff for me. But then if I go play like a lot of team sport, do a little bit less lifting, do more like single leg quick stuff, which honestly team sport is single leg quick stuff of all magnitudes with the emotion of competition. That does seem to iron it out. Or even longer sprinting, even just doing 150s and 200s, which is basically a bunch of single leg quick plyos, if you want to look at it in that perspective.
If you were to focus on, like for me in my sport of parkour, there's a multitude of different ground contacts. I'm not too concerned about having too many of one or too many of the other because I want to be able to do more.
You're
really
washing it out.
Yeah, but then I wonder if you saying that you notice how, like, if you were to cue yourself to stay diligently with I think you would be able to keep the ground contacts at that speed that you want. Would you not? Like, would you not think like you'd have the skill? Obviously, like you say, if it's just a volume thing in terms of you at a certain point in a session it would become that you're not getting what you want. But do you feel like you would be able to shift and change your technique like in that way, like with focus applied to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll give you an interesting example of because I mean the question is right, like how much of doing that kind of thing, like a high hurdle hop. I know like Rolf Oman and Randy Huntington, track coaches, has spoken about for track athletes doing too many high hurdle hops could be detrimental because of that extended ground contact piece. And I think that there is negatives to things, but there is also transience. And you could say, well, it'd be a negative if your whole structure adapted to doing it that way. Your whole structure adapted to being on the ground longer. And I do think there is something there in terms of if you got even more internal rotation biased, and your structure adapted to that a little bit, I could definitely see that. But I know for me, like if I go out and I do something like a low knee sprint, this is one of my favorite elastic training methods. And I do that in a tempo type format. And I do like a single leg jump in between each longer sprint. Every jump in between my jump gets higher, 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 higher. And I feel just super springy, like that spring, the peak of my spring that I've had, like, let's say playing basketball, being more of a basketball player. I'm like, this is what that feels like. And so there is that transience there, I think. But again, I do think it takes some reps though. Like that's why you have to run more than, it's not like, hey, do this like sprint drill for 10 meters. It's like, no, do this for 200 meters and do it a bunch of times and feel. And then, so I think, there could be a little bit of both, depending. But I mean,
it's interesting to me probably bringing up things I've not really considered all too much because of, like in terms of in a stopwatch sport or a tape measure sport, you're going to be able to pass some things out that you can't elsewhere because like these coaches are saying, oh, there's such thing as too many hurdle jumps, because that person is doing whatever, then like they can almost see that the negative consequence. And then for me, yeah, in parkour, that because it's so broad, so many different types of ground contact, so many different variety of jumps, single leg, double leg, kind of super slow, kind of deep tier plyometric actions, snappier, much more hurdle hop, traditional hurdle hop type actions, off one leg, off of vertical walls, off of all manner of jumps. It's almost harder to kind of maybe see that. So in terms of those I think ultimately like the stopwatch sports or the tape measure sports are so much more. It's got to be more precise, doesn't it? It's almost, I can afford to have a bit more of a shotgun approach because jumping is good and jumping helps me in whatever manner, but not all jumping is going to help. Not all jumps are going to be as beneficial as all other jumps for all athletes. Some athletes are going to benefit from certain types of things more, for sure. I can see that.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Plyomat. The Plyomat is a jump testing device that allows you to instantly receive ground contact times, jump heights, reactive strength measurements, and more in your training populations. It's easy to use, accurate, and affordable. And an awesome feature that I love about the Plyomat is it easily allows the connection of not just one mat, but you can string multiple mats together for use in things like multi-hurdle hops and bounding situations. I absolutely love the Plyomat, recommend it. And to check it out, you can head to plyomat.net. That's plyomat.net. Today's podcast is also sponsored by Team Builder Training Software. I've continued to hear amazing things about the Team Builder Training Portal. Whether you're working with athletes in-house or online, Team Builder has the training software needs you're looking for. You can check them out at teambuilder.com. That's teambuildr.com. Yeah, I think part of it too, like you said, you do parkour and you're always doing all sorts of different jumps. And it makes me think about something that Angus Bradley had said. It was something to the tune of, look, like if all you do is heavy squats and deadlifts and bench, you're going to start moving more like a refrigerator. That doesn't mean you can't do those. Just make sure you're doing a lot of bending and twisting and picking other auxiliary exercises in your training that have you bending and twisting at the rib cage so that you can offset that. So to me, it's not a case of don't do it. It's more like, what else are you doing to help offset this in practice? I mean, and that's where for me, like those times I do think I was negatively affected, I wasn't playing like basketball outside of training, and which is a big one. Like I wasn't doing a lot of like short sprints and racing people, which is a faster contact time. It would be like most of my training, or at least a lot of it, was weightlifting and then plyometrics that were like, the only measure of success was how high is the hurdle. Well, for me to get a really high jump, I'm going to internally rotate like crazy to do it because that's my bilateral preference. And then, I look at when I want to actually dig in and unpack the single leg piece. I know I talked about that with Brady Volmering. I've been using that more. I've actually been programming it a little bit more since then. Just because I was really, the drop legs, like doing that warm up, that was the juice, the isos and the drop legs. Okay, this is good. Sticking with this. This is in the program. And then I've been playing around with and exploring putting more single leg stuff in for people. And so far it's been really good. And I love the single leg because it was like Ebony Rio said. She was a tendon researcher I had on a long time ago. Bilateral stuff, you can hide stuff. You have more wiggling room. Single leg, there is way less wiggling and hiding. Like if you have a weak link, it is instantly exposed. And, Brady up on like the 6 foot drop. I mean, even for me, it's interesting in bringing it back into my own training. I'm like, wow, this, like I can so easily see such a direct correlation in getting to a higher single leg drop and all the mechanical structural strength pieces your leg needs to have to be explosive in sport. So I was going to ask you a little bit more about your single leg drops as well. How high you got, how big of a part you felt like that played in the whole role and everything there.
I'd say minimal because I was rubbish at them. They didn't, like, I had a really hard time with them and I was shocked. Like, so Brady's 6'1". I don't know if you know he's done some podcasts and stuff, and he's very kind of track and field style parkour guy, Callum Powell.
Yeah.
I was speaking to him, and yeah, he's an incredible jumper, far higher level athlete than I am or
Yeah,
will
like
ever
triple jump.
be.
Yeah, like that
Type
guy
of
could
thing.
triple jump incredibly if he went out and did it in track.
Yeah,
He would
like
be awesome.
he's always had a very jumpy style of parkour as well. Um, and yeah, when I shared Brody's 6'1", uh, he he uh, he he beat it. Callum deliberately went and beat it because I was like, oh, good luck. I don't, because like Callum is a real good jumper and better than me, but I didn't think it was that much better than me. But like on that one leg, what he's capable of was it's just yeah, like it's so like just level. It's like okay, that's interesting to me because yeah, the level that he's been at for so long, it was interesting to see it be reflected in something like a single leg altitude drop because he stuck it from he went just over 6 foot, I think, and yeah, so it's almost like do, does the altitude drop to one leg? Does it reflect the jumping capacity of an individual that much? Because yeah, he's probably that much better than me at parkour. How much better he is at the single leg drop? Yeah, it's similar in the level of our sport as well. Like I'd say I'm intermediate, or high intermediate, perhaps. I don't know. I've trained very broadly. I've never specialized in things. So yeah, could I be better at certain things? Yeah, maybe. I could do some hard things though. Then whereas Callum is an advanced athlete, has been advanced for a long time, and like when I was like, oh, I think you'll struggle more than you think. He didn't believe me for a second. He was like, oh no, I know it's fine, and he could just do it, and he's never trained them. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It does make me think that really single leg is, in terms of like athleticism, sprinting, jumping off one leg, triple jump, long jump, like maybe single leg is a little bit more of a thing with that. And I know I also, I remember my best year in track, college track and high jumping and triple jump. Triple jump I have a lot. I was doing a lot of just single leg hurdle hops. Like pretty, not drops, but I mean, within each one is basically almost a drop. I mean, there's not that many degrees of difference, to be honest. And for me, it was actually more motivating.
Very tough to get over hurdles and still attack the ground. Like, I think it's a definite weakness for me. Like, yeah, you talk about, I've tried some hurdle hops and I think it's a single leg. It's tough. Struggle.
Yeah. Do you think, just curious, do you think that is anything to do with your background or more maybe your build? Like you strike me as someone who's more the bilateral strength type athlete, more so than like obviously a lanky jumper, like a track jumper or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm 5'5". I'm pretty built for my size just not through aiming to be, just from training through like I do other gymnastic strength based training and things like that. Just generally training to be stronger is something that I've enjoyed. So yeah, kind of my frame is not that of an elite jumper, that's for sure. Something that I do find with the single leg drops, so if my eccentric rate of force was faster, like if I could, so I don't have great ankle mobility, and with the single leg drops, it felt like I ran out of ankle mobility before I could decelerate.
That makes sense.
So like, yeah, I couldn't go into obviously you're aiming to land relatively stiff, but I felt like I couldn't attenuate the force enough in the time that I had available, in my joint angles type of thing, like how much I could flex, which might just be an excuse, but that's what it felt like. It felt, I just couldn't. So yeah, if I could produce more force quickly to decelerate, then I'd be okay. But I couldn't, so it was greatly reduced compared to my higher drops.
Yeah, that makes sense why it might have been easier for you to just bounce, or it felt easier to bounce out of a 8-foot high drop. Because like if your ankles are running out of natural dorsiflexion range early, it does make it a lot harder to stick that landing, because now you can't use the ankle as much. You got to like bend over more at the hips or something. And then single leg just compounds it. You don't have as much other places to work that with the single leg as well.
Yeah, again, can't hide, like you say. Like I've been said, you can't hide on one leg. It really highlights, any issues that you have.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the strength impact. So you said you had done like more of a strength cycle prior, deadlifting, try to get triple body weight. When you were doing all these drops and working up, how much was lifting a part of your program then? And then in the aftermath of that, how did you notice strength, like just weight room strength?
I've heard other people talk about so I didn't get any weaker. It didn't drop off, but I didn't experience any notable strength gains, say in my squat or anything. My squat sits just below 2.5 times body weight. So that's another factor in the ability to take the drops. Maybe it's more of a strength base. If you can only squat 1 time your body weight, are the drops going to be as effective? Maybe, maybe not. But I didn't. And then maybe someone who can only squat 1 time their body weight, maybe they get a strength increase in their squat from doing the drops because there's more room for crossover there. But yeah, I can't really remember. Well, I was using, that's what, at least 1 day a week I was using a flywheel to squat, and I was purposefully doing like eccentric overload as well, like methods that would eccentrically overload that first quarter or half. So kind of a full range squat into a half squat, full range squat into a half squat, to eccentrically overload, try and develop my eccentric capacity in that range. And I was squatting normally another day. Yeah, and so I didn't get weaker and I didn't get stronger. It seemed relatively unaffected for me, which makes sense because there's less emphasis on the squats, but no detriment either.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm curious just because I know, I think this was documented with javelin trainers in some of the Soviet literature, is like doing a depth jump phase. I think their box heights were kind of in the typical prescription range, like between probably 70 and 100 centimeters, 3 and 4 feet or somewhere in there. And maybe not 4 feet, but around 3. And after doing a block of that for maybe a month or 6 weeks or whatever it was and not lifting, they tested their lift after and found it had increased. But I also look at you were very strong before. If you were almost at 3 times body weight deadlift, you almost only had anywhere to go but down from that.
And it didn't go backwards. That's kind of. If I had less of a strength base, we don't know it. So the term experiment is very loose because I wasn't controlling a lot of things, but it's just like what I do know is there was no detriment to my body or to my strength, but there was no increase in my strength, but there was an increase in my jumping. So it's kind of, I will routinely bring them back. Probably I'd probably do it in a winter period where I'm training less parkour, so I can handle less jumping overall, and then build off of that. It seems like that would be effective for me, at least.
I love the winter period of training. Christian Thibodeau, ever since he mentioned that on the podcast, maybe about a year ago or so, he had mentioned that, like having a seasonality to things. I think that's just something that's so cool about parkour versus, let's say, a sport that's maybe like an indoor sport, like basketball or something. Like people play basketball year round now. It's like, well, there's no seasonality. I mean, it used to be you just play pickup games outside in the park in the summer or something. There was at least there was 3-on-3 and it was different. There's seasonality to it. And ever since that podcast, I've always been thinking of ways to tweak training per the season. And it's been amazing. It's been a really profound part of what I do. So that's really cool that you, that's like, hey, in the summer, like it's the sun's out, let's get outside. Let's just do the thing. And then you're saving that stimulus for, all right, it's the winter. Maybe it's more associated with strength, or like, you're building strength to express and it's seasonal versus, you could like, vertical integration, you always have something of everything in, which I think is fine. But I also think there's something special, especially with longevity, to like looking forward to the next season of things, of training, whatever that is.
And for me, it's definitely, I like to train the vertical integration style, training things concurrently. But within that, things do fall by the wayside, and I pick up other things. I kind of go where I'm going to find enjoyment, type of thing. So in the summer, I'm going to be doing more parkour. In the winter, it's going to be less because the weather is rubbish and it's kind of enforced. If I'm going to be in the gym more, and I don't have these parkour related goals as much because it's much more about maintenance. In the winter, it's hard to get good sessions in where I am. I'm gonna like pick a random movement to get stronger on and see where it goes. That's something I've always naturally done. Like whether it's Nordic curls, whether it's ab wheel rollouts, whether it's like something more skilled like a one-arm chin up, I go with that. So like it's almost not necessarily seasonal, but it matches with the seasons, because I get bored of this, so I'll go and do something else. And ultimately, being stronger, I've in parkour, I've never experienced a negative. Like it doesn't. I don't see. Potentially in another sport doing some powerlifting or doing some whatever could make you slower or something like that. But I don't. I've never experienced that, but that's the thing. I still, in my parkour training, it will be less frequent. It will be less developmental type of thing. I won't be hitting these new hard things for me, but I get massive variety within them. So if in the gym it kind of narrows down a little bit, and then I train parkour, that's getting my variety of movement, moving such a broad manner of ways in parkour that I don't need to worry about it. So it's easy to go wherever I feel, and kind of just, if I'm trying to like level up the organism in some way, that checks a box for me, and I'm getting better because of that.
Yeah. What so in the summer, so speaking of parkour season, what do you so when you are out and doing more dynamic work in your environment, something I was thinking about, and I started thinking about this a lot when I actually went to Return to the Source with Rafe Kelly, was precision landings. I had never, until then, I did not know what a precision landing was. And which is basically landing with your feet close together and the knees go outwards in the landing. And you go into a little bit of a squat. And although some people go in like a full squat, and I found that was so interesting. And please feel free to expand on this or interject if needed. But what I found so interesting is I was thinking about Rafe's anecdote of when he trained more formally for vertical jump training in his early 20s, doing like, the official sets and reps and the more official sets and reps of plyometrics and those things, and everything was a little more canned and closed. And he said that he had gotten basically the same, maybe even better results just doing parkour training in his 30s, and in terms of dunking ability. And I was thinking about when I was there, it's like you would do like, let's say, a running triple jump series off of rocks or logs and finish with a precision. And I'm like, all right, you're basically finishing with a running long jump into a squat, which is kind of the same forces as a drop, like a big drop. It's just horizontal. And then you're squatting the landing. So you're kind of getting this dynamic squat strength little finisher on the end. I was like, this is so cool because you're getting dynamic plyos, jump. Now you basically get a bonus squat here. So you're kind of getting it all wrapped up into one piece that is play and not even necessarily formal training. And honestly, I feel like
engagement. You've got a task that's very engaging. So like you said, you've got the single leg takeoffs. They're going to be much stiffer, overcoming takeoffs. The landing at the end are much more yielding landing. So within one task, you're getting like the stimulus from multiple directions, and it's fun. So you're not even thinking about what training stimulus it is. So you're probably going to do a little bit more. I heard you talk, I can't remember, maybe with Jake Tourer actually, how taking off such unique, every single rep's going to be more different than, so every rep's going to be different anyway, even if you're doing bounds on the ground, it's going to be somewhat different. But if you're taking off non-flat surfaces, one rep, your foot's going to be more everted, one foot rep's going to be more inverted, and the rotation through the body that's going to create. So does that allow you to do a little bit more alongside that fun? Like if you're having fun and then you don't get the overuse because it's different enough, that could be, I think that's a massive part of, because you're engaged and you can do a lot of it because it's fun and because you're not just pounding against concrete or a track or whatever.
Yeah.
I find that interesting.
Yeah, it's like basketball, or even like some of the, like, it's so interesting to start looking for those, you could call them combo movements, things where you're getting multiple ends of the plyometric and athletic spectrum. Like basketball, even, like you get an athlete goes up to dunk and then jumps and kind of lands on one leg, maybe kind of relatively stiff-legged one leg landing, kind of turning at the same time. You see it in volleyball a lot. I started noticing it. I remember there was when I was at Cal, there was a volleyball coach who was a really high jumper. He'd jump on the vertex and touch like almost 12 feet. And he would come down twisting sideways on one leg. I'm like, this guy's getting the 2-leg jump and he's getting a single leg landing all in one shot. That's awesome. And, I was even thinking about this the other day because spending time in track and field, you watch athletes doing their runouts before like the 100-meter dash. They come out of the blocks, they sprint hard for 20, 30, maybe 40 meters, and then they cool it down. But when they decelerate, they tend to do this like bouncy deceleration where like, it's hard to describe, but it's almost like you have the power output on the acceleration end. And then as they're bouncing to decelerate, they're getting elasticity. And it's like, you wouldn't see that off the outset, but like, that's this thing that defines like just how athletes, and especially athletes who have that sense of movement and power and elasticity, it's all wrapped into one. I just think those are really cool things because in a world where we will segment all those skills, well, this is for this, this is for this, this is for this, and so that's just something I think about a lot because I think when we can wrap those things into a variable package, it's fun, it's task oriented. We aren't even thinking necessarily about training something, but it's getting trained too, and it's a nice training package.
Yeah, that's massive with the parkour side of things because most people in parkour know nothing about training, yet they get better with guidance or without guidance. It's almost, parkour can be kind of simplified to you're trying to challenge yourself with different movement challenges. That can be extremely broad, or some people will train quite narrow and do the same type of challenges. But you do some challenges until you're bored and done for the day, and you go home. And then you come back the next day, you do it again. And you come back 2 weeks later, you do a little bit more. And without knowing anything about training, the engagement in the process of like wanting to complete this task, it's not. Yeah, no one wants to do their 10 barbell back squats like as a task. They know it will lead to somewhere, but there's nothing really inherently enjoyable or kind of drawing you in to doing those squats. It's more like, what the outcomes down the line that motivate people there. In parkour, it's very much the actual task. And sometimes nothing can grab your attention all day. Maybe you're feeling a bit tired, you're just not feeling amazing, body's not great or whatever. And you do a bit of training that looks a lot more like traditional gym training. Maybe you do a few sets of this jump and a few sets of that jump, and you kind of sit down, you're not really feeling it. And you can go all day like that. You've written off the day like, this is a rubbish day. And then what often happens is, even if I was hungry or needed the toilet or both at the same time, and I've had a rubbish day, I've gone, this has been a waste of time today, we then stumble across something that authentically grabs your attention, and there's just a spark. and the hunger, the need to go to the toilet, the bad rest of the day disappears, and you're engaged. When you authentic, like kind of, genuinely are grabbed by something. Like I could be having a terrible training session where I don't feel powerful, but some of the best stuff I've ever done came in those sessions because for whatever reason that challenge grabbed my attention, and you just kind of everything else goes away, and you're like on this task. It's like, okay, I want to do this, and maybe it's one of these battles where you start trying it and it's not going well, and then you keep going, a few more, and you're getting closer. And you're like, oh, I can't quit now. You've probably, in the most sensible way, you probably should call it quits because you've done a lot, you've taken a lot of impact there, or you kind of gone past what the sensible volume for that thing is. But it's because it's not about that training effect. You're like, okay, I'm going to carry on. You do 3 more. People would say there's diminishing returns, but then you do 3 more, and it's like, okay, I've got this now. And at that point, you're like, I'm 100% getting this. Like 10 attempts ago, wasn't on the cards. Now I've stuck with it. I'm fully warm. I'm fully switched on, and you pull it out the bag, kind of in a way that you'd never expect. I guess it's similar to when you rock up to the gym to train and you're not feeling it. You do your warm up sets, you get moving, and people PR on those days. But I think there's another layer with that, that spark that comes with this outside task that, for whatever reason, I can't really explain why I'm drawn to and want to do and want to complete. Purely for the fact of completing the challenge, not for any other reason.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's something that's really such a cool facet of parkour, or the spirit of parkour as a universal training piece. I was having a conversation with Jared Burton recently, who was on this podcast a while ago. He was talking about the idea of, I believe it was play, explore, and outputs. And so often we look at training only from outputs. Like that's the only thing. It's sets, reps, technique, percentages or whatever. And in reality, in life, it's more complex than that. There's this swirling. I'm trying to think of a word. Swirling is a good one. This swirling interaction of play, of exploration, and then that can lead to outputs. On days you aren't feeling it, if you warmed up with a game, all of a sudden you might be jumping higher than you thought you would. Why is that? Versus if you just came in, it's like, all right, I'm going to go through this scripted warm up, and it's all very, you could say robotic. It's just very scripted. Yeah. Versus it's almost like as soon as something is not scripted, as soon as there is a level of play, of exploration, it kind of brings online a different part of the system. And that's not to say it's going to turn every bad day into a great day, but like one of the things,
it stands a better chance than a traditional dynamic warm up. Though there's much higher chances of it being turned around. And it's like, what is that? There's not a measure for that. You can't measure that thing, but we know it exists. It is real, but you can't get your athletes to come in and measure that thing and then decide how your day's going to go. But that is fascinating to me because what is that? You can't even really attach a word. I was struggling earlier to attach a word to this. This excitement. You didn't choose to be excited about this thing. It's just come over you, and because you're now excited, all the problems aren't problems now, and you can perform.
Yeah, it is hard to describe. It's like trying to describe how do I feel after playing a game of pickup basketball or two where I'm going to be able to jump way higher than if I just ran through a scripted dynamic warm-up. It's the main way to describe it is just kind of like the general energy, the kind of the vibe, for lack of a better word, that I feel. There's something about how I feel in this state that is different. Fundamentally, there's other people around I'm playing with. There's a spirit of competition, but also fun and the variable movement, like you mentioned. So, I think there's a lot to that. I do want to go into maybe, I don't know if it's a gear shift. You mentioned the variability that comes with parkour, and you talked about your plyometrics. You talked about doing like a crescendo hurdle hops or a variable hurdle hops. It's funny because you mentioned the plyo of the week thing I used to do. I was like, blast from the past. I don't know how long ago I did that, but that was fun putting those together. But, I was going to ask you a little bit about
resource for people. I'm glad it's still there. Like you can always refer back. It's on the internet. So might have been a long time ago that you did it, but it's very helpful still.
Yeah, they were fun. It was fun to put those together. And what was it? I was just thinking you mentioned parkour and the variable surfaces, and I talk about the creek running all the time. I would just run on rocks in the creek as a therapeutic lower leg stimulus, for myself. I remember when I was at Return to the Source, which was in Washington State, there was different groups of people there doing, like, when we go out and do parkour at the parks, or a lot of like big rocks and all these things. And there was like the advanced parkour athletes, the intermediate group, and then there was a group that was like less experienced. And I remember some people were amazing, and then there were some people who hadn't done a lot of parkour. And I was watching a few of them. They do like a jump, and I'd see a landing, and I'd be like, oh, like somebody who hadn't just been training it. And if you saw that landing in a more like a repetitive situation, like if they just did that in the gym off a box and landed that way over and over again, yes, they are going to get hurt. But that that person who landed like that and probably landed like that several other times throughout the day was not hurt, because it's just going to be variable. It's just breaking up the way the stimulus is applied repeatedly, and it allows you, like you said, along the lines of the Jake Tura podcast with the variability in the tendon, it allows you to accumulate reps. And so just that being said, I'm curious what your approach to more typical plyometric prescriptions might be. I know you're working with figure skaters. You have general population clients. When it comes time, you can't just take those athletes out and be like, all right, we're going to go out into the street and do parkour. And obviously that wouldn't be the best idea in a lot of situations, although it'd be certainly fun at some point in the year, in the off season, perhaps. But when it comes time for more prescriptive plyometrics, how do you frame that in the gym based off your parkour experience?
So something that I think I picked up more from Will Rattel than anyone else is I do often set a time frame, and it's more open in that time frame. And what ends up happening, people accumulate roughly the traditional kind of guidelines of jumps type of thing. They don't end up with ridiculous volumes or anything. Obviously, it depends where you look, but there's the different kind of volume guidelines that are out there. And yeah, so I've seen Will say, oh, go until bored, or go until disinterested, or 10 minutes on the timer, rest as much as you need, and kind of let's accumulate some jumping here. And honestly, that is kind of my go-to in terms of because I'm with the people that I'm working, so I'm with the figure skaters that I'm primarily working with. It's kind of youth figure skaters, and we're trying to. It's more about their general athleticism. So I'm challenging them in different ways, and kind of want lots of variety and lots of different stimulus. So with the jumping side of things, it's a segment of what we do, and and expose them to a bunch of different things. So kind of in this time frame, if we can. Honestly, I don't know if I can necessarily put a number on it, because, like I say, sometimes, majority of the time now, I've kind of tracked it a little bit, and it's kind of works out into very typical volumes, like kind of something that's not ridiculous, something that's not nothing. And I can't actually really put a number on that right now. I can't think.
That's okay.
It's kind of that I find that an enjoyable way, because of that normal prescription of 3 sets of 5 box jumps or whatever it is. It's quite generic and boring, and it doesn't encourage the kind of that's very much like the dynamic warm-up. That is a bit like we're going through the motions, we're not engaged as much. So just having that time window to accumulate some jumps in is something that I feel like I've had success with. I feel like I see the difference with the people I'm working with, for sure, over time, because it's just consistent exposure to that.
Yeah, I could see that being like the parkour type framing is it makes it more task oriented rather than if you had the spectrum between full training, which is sets, reps, percentages, everything, and then on the other end it's just pure play. It's taking that meter or that needle just slightly away from pure training, and that now there's a little bit more exploration on the table and how long you can choose to rest or things like
Because
that.
in the same session, we might do some ISOs, and that's very close. That's just feels like training. Yeah, there can be a little bit of competition in there for sure, but it's, you're holding it for 30 seconds, a minute, as long as you can, whatever it may be. There's not much wiggle room there. I want you to hold this position and go for this long. So kind of, when I've had positive, the looseness with the jumps is something that I've experienced positive with myself. I used to do the 5 sets of 5, the 3 sets of 10, or whatever it is, of jumping, and didn't really ever notice, or like these days I can notice much greater, or since I started training in the way that I do, rotating through the jump variations, I've noticed such greater improvement. Like, I see it more in my sport. I think it's more to do with just the adaptability of what I'm throwing at myself, more than, and like if I'm jumping, or if we're doing jumps, great. And then if you're becoming more adaptable through those jumps, even better in my eyes, type of thing. Because the skill, the skills of the skill, they're going to be, say with the youth figure skaters, they're going to be on the ice, they're going to be practicing their jumps, and they're going to be doing quite a lot. So I don't want things that look like that. I want everything else, so that they know they're more adaptable for when they fall, because they will fall, for example. Or like if they end up jumping higher, probably going to be helpful. But I see it as very, very general, because they're so specialized. I'd rather just give them what they don't get as athletes on the ice. That is the kind of the main aim with those guys that I'm working with.
Yeah. It gives an interesting frame to the purpose of training as adaptability. And it's like, well, what does it mean? What are things that can make training a little more adaptable? If absolutely every single thing in the training session is 100% scripted, how much room, there might be some room to experiment a little bit within each script, with each set and rep and things like that. But, it does get my wheels turning on those little interjections to give a level of autonomy to an athlete to problem solve. Would you say that, like what in your mind would be plyometrics that might be better? Do you have in your mind plyometrics or jumping tasks that might be better from a time versus a sets reps perspective? Like, just off, the top of my head, I kind of feel like things that have more complexity to them, that are a little bit more like if you're doing like 360 jumps over a hurdle, like a running 360 over a hurdle, or something that's just a little harder. It seems like that would be something that'd make more sense to give a time frame to. Hey, do this for 15 minutes or something, or whatever, versus things like, hey, we're going to do depth landings, or I don't know. Like, I'm just curious what your frame is on things you might be more prescriptive with, or just expanding on that a little bit.
Where I'm actually a little bit more prescriptive with myself, and like if I'm doing, like, I kind of probably broadly separate my jumps into, or jumping into, like the multi-effort true plyometrics and the jumping. I probably am a bit more prescriptive in the jumping, because there's less creative, like, so single effort, multi-effort versus single effort. If we just want some like higher effort concentric output, where I feel like there's maybe less. So something with like the hurdle variations, I've really, really enjoyed using those, and it's not for the ground contact times and the elasticity, or it's for, again, another very hard to measure thing, and it's like the coordination. There isn't we can't measure, and that the coordination, the relaxation, the timing, but they're not in there. That's such a big feature to the different. So I had for hurdle variations that are quite similar but different enough, I get different heights, and like, you'd think they'd probably be the same height. For example, a crescendo where each one's going higher, I end up at a lower height than if I do a low, a high, a low, a high, it ends up different. And it almost doesn't feel like it should, because it's not vastly, uh, it doesn't vary all that much, but it's like the relaxation, the coordination, or it's almost all these extra things. I'm not really even caring about the jumps there, because they almost take care of themselves. You're not going to get over if you don't rebound while off the floor. But then, so in the things that don't have that, so yeah, more just single jumping, I'd say I'd be more prescriptive, because there's less to explore. I feel like that relaxation, that time in the, like, I'll often like shake my hands, or kind of vibrate before doing hurdle hops, just because it feels right. It feels like, oh yeah, I'm going to get it, and I have to know on the first jump if it's going to be the one where I get over. Even just by feel, I don't know what I'm feeling, but it's that coordination, and it's, yeah, like you say, it's a bit more complex, but that's where I see the complexity in those, like that, whatever that is. Again, it's hard to measure, but I've seen that take place, and people benefit from it, and myself benefit from it. So like to keep that open, to tap into those. People start figuring stuff out they didn't figure out before. You're not going to figure out much on just a box jump. It's like,
What's the learning on a box jump? How much learning can take place here? Probably not a lot.
So that's where I'd be more prescriptive, like a single effort jump, which obviously have value, but it's different. It's different enough.
Yeah, it's I think it's really cool to make that, and it's funny. I almost I couldn't expect anything less with a parkour athlete to have different waveforms of hurdle hopping, and it is kind of funny to think. Back in my track days, it was just, hey, line 8 hurdles up. They're all the same height. Do the same, and it's all at that point. It is basically all almost, there is coordination, but it's more about the tissues. But I found actually in hindsight, it's like there's these little subtle changes you make to your training year to year, and then it just adds up to be a big thing. But my knees got wrecked doing that kind of thing, where everything was the same, same waveform over and over again. Versus nowadays, it's like if you're interspersing, high, low, high, low, high, long, like, and you're letting the body work in a little bit different manner, from that variability perspective. There is something that's also there with, I think, just how the body's meant to move in general. And I think it's also too, like you look at the session and just helping athletes learn different waveforms of how they move and how did that feel versus the other, thinking about it. I think that's really a good thing, to have in
you see the improvement as well. You change it up and people fall apart, and it's like, oh, they need to make an adjustment. They need to kind of take that information in, their body processes it, and then after a couple of goes or whatever, they're back jumping really well. And in that processing of the data they've got from trying something, not doing it quite as well, and they can't measure that. But that's where I feel like a lot of the positives come from.
Yeah. It's like in the book, it's an old book. It's like 1990, The Science of Sports Training by Thomas Kurz. Dan John mentioned it in Easy Strength. It was like the long jumpers. There was long jumpers that their every jump was max in practice and training. And then there was a group that every jump was like, to a target. And it might not be max. It might be, a foot or two short of your best. And the group that had the diverse amount of jumps actually ended up jumping further in the end. And I think, I feel like there's opportunities for that within every training session, not even at the tail end. Like you could warm up if you were doing hurdle hops and maybe you wanted to end up more traditional, like 6 hurdles and they're all the same and they're all high. But what if you warmed up with different heights and different, you warmed up with a few crescendos or a few high lows and you did that.
And there's plenty of people who applied that principle to other areas of gym work. Like, I don't even bench press, but I think of Louis Simmons in the bench press, he would, on the dynamic days, get them to change the hand position every rep.
Yeah.
Like people have applied that principle. You just mentioned it being applied in track and field. I think it kind of naturally happens more in parkour. And then, but when it pops up numerous places from people who don't know each other, that's always interesting.
Yeah, that cross pollination, that intersection of ideas is awesome. I love that you brought up the Louis Simmons reference. So just to close it out, is there anything, you had the high jumping experiment, the high drop experiment. Is there anything new on the horizon that you're thinking of, considering, or wheels are turning on for your own training?
Well, I bought some eccentric hooks and I was going to start doing that. And I started exploring some options there, but I've just recently hurt my foot like last week. So that's put a stop to that for the time being. But one thing that did spring to mind, because I listened to your podcast with Jake Tura the other day. I know it's a few weeks old. And you've mentioned, I forgot his name, Dak. What's his name again?
Brady.
Brady, yeah. And his impulse training. I've experimented with that. So the impulse straps. And I had a very positive experience from resolving some patellar tendinopathy.
Interesting.
Using that. And when Jake Tura spoke about training the bone end of the tendon, I was like, yeah, that's what that felt like that was doing for me. So I actually developed tendinopathy in both knees from a direct blow to both knees on a particular parkour movement. So it's an arm jumper cat leap where you land with your feet on the wall, you tend to slide down a little bit and hold on, and then you climb up. I 1 week did a pretty big one of them, slid, banged my knee. And the tendon wasn't right. It was direct blows to the tendon. 2 weeks, I carried on training. It was like pissed off. It wasn't great. I did the same movement somewhere else and managed to do the same thing to my other knee. Banged it, direct blow, and both my tendons started to play up. Like immediately after direct blow. I trained for a year, kind of doing all the stuff that you should. The isometrics, the heavy slow loading. I could train as normal. Like I could always get warm and my tendons feel okay, and I'm not too concerned, not too worried. I've got the background to kind of manage that problem. But I was getting increasingly more bored with having to. I lost my ability to just go without warming up or anything. I always had to really thoroughly warm up just the tendon to get it going. So I went, oh, screw it, I'm going to try something more extreme. I think I would quickly know if this is bad and not working, and I can cut it. But if it feels good, I'll do it. So I started doing the basically ballistic knee extension against the strap, where there's that collision each time. And within 2 weeks of doing that, like twice a week, my knee pain dropped 90%. Like it was basically better within a couple of weeks after having it for a solid year in both knees. And then I progressed to the ones that he does on the reverse hyper. So you've got the swing and pendulum that you're then colliding against on the strap. And I've not had any knee issues since. So those drop jumps that I was doing or altitude drops, came shortly after I resolved my knee issues. So I got no negative consequence to the drops, even though it was off the back of persistent tendon issues. And I brought that up just because of the Jake Tura's talking about, maybe we can train the bone end of the tendon. And I actually messaged him to say, that's what my experience was. And it felt like, because I got no pain during them, and they're really quite aggressive. And the whole kind of point is that they're quite aggressive. And they never hurt my knee. And like I say, very, 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 very quickly resolved the issue entirely.
Yeah, it's interesting with the impulse. I'll have to put that in the show notes for sure, associated with the podcast here. So if people go to justflysports.com and the podcast page, I'll try to have one of Brady's impulse exercises there. It kind of reminds me too of like David Gray talked about just doing like a bunch of just quick heel taps, like quick heel impulses for Achilles tendon type stuff. And I found that to be beneficial as well. And so it's interesting, just there's something about that repetitive, you have isometrics, but it's almost like anything that's like on a timer, like maybe where it is not variable anymore, but it's like, and the
so I feel like part of it was maybe an inhibitory effect as well. You go through quite a bit of fatigue and then keep going because it's kind of self-regulating. You'll just start extending your knee less forcefully as you fatigue, generally doing sort of relatively high reps. So I feel like there's something of that, but then I do think there's something in, thinking about traditional martial arts, then striking hard objects to strengthen the bone. It's not something I've ever thought about really, but obviously it's quite a traditional martial arts perspective.
Yeah.
And that feels the same because there's just this hard collision. It didn't hurt the knee. Yeah. Like you didn't feel the tendon, you just felt the quad, which is, again, so that's maybe not saying like train the tendon end of the muscle, the bone end of the tendon rather, and more the muscle. But for whatever reason, when Jake said that, I was like, that is what I experienced.
Interesting. Impulse training bones and tendons. That's a good association to make. It's cool because you see that stuff and you be like, oh, what is going on here? I think it's always cool when you think more about the adaptations happening. So,
and honestly, with that stuff, it's like you don't get it until you try it. You try it and it's like, oh, I see the value here, and obviously it looks pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But I've also did that quite extensively for upper body and saw some really interesting results in vaulting movements. I became objectively far more powerful and more reactive through the upper body from doing them, which was very cool to experience.
Awesome. Well, that's cool stuff. Yeah. I don't have any setups like that Brady has, but I'm going to have to start thinking about how to do it here. So that's good stuff. Well, hey, thank you so much, Chris. It was great talking to you. I really enjoy your perspective. It's really cool to get outside of the typical, I guess you could say, training boxes I'm not really sure what the phrase is, but parkour being well outside of the typical sports strength and conditioning training box. So it was great hearing your perspective on those things. And thanks for your time on the show.
Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to speak to you, man. Followed your stuff for a long time, so it's kind of cool to get to chat.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week.